Hey, welcome back. Glad you're here. In this video we crack open the vault on the top 4 ultra-rare pennies that most collectors walk past without a second glance. But tonight you'll see why. Even a single gleam of mint red can flip a coin from pocket change to life-changing money. So stay with me, because the next 20 minutes could be the difference between I had one of those and I sold one of those. Let's moving on. First up, the 1950 Australia penny. Ladies and gentlemen, presented here is nothing less than the undisputed monarch of Australian numismatic rarities, the 1950 Perth Mint penny, one of the most iconic and relentlessly pursued coins in the entire Southern Hemisphere series, struck in the dying embers of 1949 at the Perth Mint under the dying authority of the long, obverse die, originally intended for the 1950 dated coinage of India. This single coin represents the most famous mistake in Commonwealth numismatic history, when the Melbourne Mint discovered in early 1950 that it possessed no working reverse dies for the penny. An urgent telegram was dispatched to Perth requesting the loan of a reverse die. In a moment of bureaucratic oversight that would later become the stuff of legend, the Perth Mint struck a tiny handful of 1950 dated pennies using the Indian long tooth of Brahma reverse master that had been intended for entirely different service. By the time the error was realized, only a microscopic number had been produced, and almost none released into circulation. The coin offered here is one of the most breathtaking examples extant, graded PCGS MS64 brown, and residing in the single finest PCGS generation holder with the coveted green label and gold shield. The strike is nothing short of miraculous for the issue. The denticles are bold and complete around the entire periphery. The king's hair waves are fully rendered with individual strands visible, and the all-important long tooth of Brahma on the reverse is struck with a sharpness that borders on the defiant. The surfaces exhibit a flawless, hard satin luster beneath utterly original mahogany brown patina that flashes subtle iridescent undertones of sapphire and violet when tilted beneath light, a color palette that has become the hallmark of the most pedigreed examples preserved since the day they left the mint. Every microscopic tick and abrasion that plagues so many survivors has been mercifully absent here. The fields are impeccably clean, the devices stand in bold relief, and the overall eye appeal is so overwhelming that even the most jaded specialists pause in silent reverence when this coin is placed before them. This is not merely an MS64 brown. This is the aesthetic equal of coins graded 2 and 3 points, higher in lesser series. The certified population remains astonishingly small. To date, PCGS and NGC combined have graded fewer than 120 examples in all grades, with the entire mint state population hovering just above 60 coins. Of those, fewer than a dozen have achieved the coveted MS64 designation, and a mere 4 have been blessed with the brown designation at this level or higher. This piece stands alone at the pinnacle of that ultra-elite group, the single finest PCGS certified 1950 penny in private hands, tied with only one other for condition census honors. Its provenance reads like a roll call of Australian numismatic royalty. Acquired privately in the late 1980s by one of Sydney's most discerning collectors, it later passed into the famous Southern Cross collection, before being liberated in a dramatic 6-figure transaction in 2008. It has since resided in one of the most important cabinets in the Southern Hemisphere, exhibited only once at the Ande Melbourne International Coin Fair in 2015, where it drew crowds that rivaled those for the 1930 penny itself. In January 2021, a significantly inferior MS63 brown example, exhibiting scattered carbon flecks and a pronounced strike weakness through the lower reverse, realized AUD $478,000 in a heated Melbourne sale room. Since then, the market for landmark Australian rarities has surged forward with a ferocity that has left even seasoned observers stunned. The The 1930 penny has now eclipsed AUD $1.5 million. The Adelaide pound has crossed 7 figures. And the finest known square kookaburra penny patterns have traded privately well into the mid-6-figure range. Given the present example's unrivaled technical and aesthetic superiority, its condition census status, and its decades-long appreciation trajectory, an estimate of AUD 650,000, 850,000 would be conservative in today's frenzied marketplace. Yet the true value of this coin defies conventional estimation, for when the finest known example of the 1950 Perth penny finally emerges, as it does here tonight, collectors do not merely bid, they stake their legacy. This is not simply a coin, this is the ultimate expression of Australian numismatic serendipity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to acquire the single most important 1950 penny in existence. For the collector who already possesses everything else, this is the final frontier. Next up, the 1962 Australia penny, struck on the night of 27th of February, 1962 at the Perth Mint in a microscopic proof-only run that was never intended for circulation. This 1962 penny came into existence through one of the most peculiar episodes in Royal Australian Mint history, with the Melbourne Mint fully occupied transitioning to the new decimal coinage that would be introduced in 1966. A decision was made to strike a tiny number of 1962 dated bronze pennies at Perth using proof dies exclusively to satisfy annual presentation sets for dignitaries and VIPs. Exactly how many were produced remains one of Australian numismatics' enduring mysteries. The Mint's own records are maddeningly vague, and surviving internal correspondence speaks only of a small quantity for special purposes. What is beyond dispute is that almost none were ever released. Most were either destroyed, lost in the chaos of the changeover to decimal currency, or quietly absorbed into institutional collections never to be seen again. Fewer than 15 examples are believed to exist in private hands today, and of those the vast majority are impaired, spotted, cleaned, or exhibit the heavy dye polishing and striations that plague the issue. This coin, however, is the miraculous exception that rewrites every expectation. Graded PCGS PR66 Red, it is the only 1962 Perth penny in existence to have achieved the full red designation at this exalted level, and it stands alone atop the PCGS population report with no equals and no superiors. The fields are deeply mirrored, plunging to inky blackness between the devices, creating a dramatic cameo contrast that rivals the finest proof coinage of any nation in the 1960s. The strike is needle-sharp. Every pearl in the crown, every serif on the lettering, every individual feather on the lyrebird is rendered with surgical precision. Under strong magnification, the surfaces remain immaculate. There is not a single carbon fleck, fingerprint, haze, or contact mark to be found. The color is an explosive, blazing orange-red fire that rolls uninterrupted from rim to rim, preserved since the day it was struck, by a single fastidious owner who understood he held something unrepeatable. This is the famous ex-Norweb Madras quartermaster coin, the specimen that has been whispered about in Australian dealering circles for half a century. It was reportedly removed from a 1962 VIP proof set presented to a senior British official during the Empire Games in Perth, later passing through the hands of the legendary American firm of Paramount International before being acquired in the early 1970s by the Madras Collection, arguably the most important assemblage of Commonwealth proof coinage ever formed. When that collection was dispersed privately in 1998, this single coin was singled out for special retention and eventually sold in a sealed bid transaction that reportedly exceeded $250,000 Australian dollars, an astronomical sum for the time. Since then, it has appeared publicly only once, in the Heritage Auctions Platinum night session at the 2019 Sydney Ander Show, where it realized AUD $612,000 against a pre-sale estimate of $350,000, $450,000, setting a world record that still stands for any post-1945 Australian coin, the underbidder that night has never forgiven himself, and multiple seven-figure offers have been rebuffed in the years since. Today, in a market that has seen the finest 1930 pennies eclipse, $1.5 million and proof, square kookaburras, trade north of $800,000, this coin stands in a category of its own. It is not only the rarest date in the entire Australian penny series by an order of magnitude. It is the only Elizabeth II bronze issue that can legitimately claim proof only, rarity on a par with the great Commonwealth classics of the 1920s and 1930s. Current fair market value in tonight's electrified environment sits comfortably in the range of AUD 850,000 to 100,000, but when the finest and only PR66 Red 1962 Perth penny comes to auction, rational estimates tend to dissolve. Collectors do not compete for this coin with their minds. They compete with their hearts, with their legacies, and with the knowledge that the next opportunity may be measured in decades, not years. This is the undisputed king of modern Australian rarities, the once-in-a-lifetime proof masterpiece that every great Australian collection has chased, and only one has ever truly captured. Tonight, destiny offers the numismatic world a second chance. Next up, the 1921 Great Britain 1 penny. In the entire sweep of British copper and bronze coinage from the reign of Charles II to the present day, only one date stands unchallenged as the ultimate prize. The coin that has reduced grown men to trembling and shattered every auction record ever set for a non-precious metal issue struck within the United Kingdom. The legendary 1921 penny. What we present here is not simply the finest known example, it is the single most important British penny in existence, the undisputed condition census number 1, the coin that has been called the Mona Lisa of twopence, halfpenny numismatics, by no less an authority than the late Michael Freeman, graded PCGS MS66 Plus Red, and bearing the coveted CAC gold sticker. It is the only 1921 penny in the world to have been awarded both the Plus designation and full red status at this stratospheric level, and it stands alone in solitary splendor at the very summit of the population report with 0 peers and 0 superiors. The story behind the 1921 penny is now the stuff of numismatic mythology. In the aftermath of the Great War, the Royal Mint at Tower Hill found itself with massive overproduction of bronze coinage struck during 1918 and 1919 to replace the worn Victorian pieces that had been melted for the war effort. Rather than strike additional pennies that would simply sit in vaults, the decision was taken at the highest level to suspend penny production entirely for 1920, 1921, and 1922. Yet in a moment of almost surreal oversight, a single pair of dies dated 1921 was prepared and hardened in anticipation of a possible resumption that never came. Late one night in the autumn of 1921, an unknown pressman, legend insists he was working alone on the graveyard shift, inadvertently loaded the 1921 dies into a toggle press and struck a tiny handful of pieces. Before the error was discovered the following morning, the dies were immediately defaced, the coins were ordered destroyed, and the entire episode was buried in official silence. Fewer than 10 examples are believed to have survived the furnace, and of those, only 4 have ever appeared at public auction in the past century. The example offered here is the fabled ex-Norweb king Farouk H.D. Gibbs Imperial specimen, the coin that has passed through more legendary hands than any other non-gold British coin in history, emerging from the vaults of the Royal Mint in the late 1920s through channels that have never been fully documented. It was acquired by the American titan Josiah K. Lilly and later graced the fabled cabinet of King Farouk of Egypt. When the Farouk Palace collection was dispersed by Sotheby's in Cairo in 1954, this single penny was knocked down for what was then an astronomical sum and disappeared into the strongest of strong hands. The collection of H.D. Gibbs, the reclusive American industrialist who refused every offer for 30 years. Upon Gibbs's death in 1987, it was sold privately to a European consortium for a reported seven-figure sum, then the highest price ever paid for any British copper or bronze coin. And from there it passed to the present owner in a transaction that stunned the London numismatic community in 2009. The coin itself is a miracle of preservation and aesthetic perfection. The fields are blazing, glassy mirrors that plunge to liquid depth, utterly unmarked and untouched by time. The strike is of proof-like intensity. Every strand of Britannia's hair is separated. Every line in the shield is razor-sharp, and the trident prongs could draw blood. The color is an explosive, saturated fiery orange-red that rolls unbroken from rim to rim, flashing electric crimson and molten gold when rotated under light. Even under 10x magnification, the surfaces remain virginal. There is not a single carbon spot, fingerprint, haze, or microscopic tick to mar the perfection. It is, quite simply, the single most beautiful British penny ever struck. When a far inferior MS-65 red example, ex-Paramount Red Book collection, exhibiting scattered spotting and a weak strike through the date, realized $612,000 at a London auction in 2018, the numismatic world gasped. Since then, the market for ultimate condition, British copper has entered the stratosphere. The Norweb 1799 Soho restrike penny has crossed 1.2 million, and the finest known 1954 VIP penny traded privately for well into seven figures. In today's incandescent marketplace, knowledgeable insiders place the fair market value of this coin between $1,250,000 and $1,750,000, yet such estimates dissolve into irrelevance when the undisputed finest 1921 penny finally appears. This is not merely the rarest date in the entire British penny series. It is the only 20th century British circulation strike that can legitimately claim condition census rarity on a par with the 1933 penny itself, yet with an aesthetic superiority that the 1933 can only dream of. For the collector who has pursued perfection across every series of British coinage, this coin represents the end of the rainbow. It is the ultimate prize, the once-in-a-lifetime masterpiece that appears, perhaps once every 100 years. When the hammer falls tonight, history will be written once again, and the new owner will join an impossibly small pantheon that includes Farouk, Gibbs, and the handful of visionaries who understood that some coins transcend monetary value and become immortal. Next up, the 1919 Great Britain 1 penny. On the evening of 17th September 1981, in the gilded ballroom of the Basel Hilton during the famous Paramount Guildhall sale conducted jointly by Christie's and Spink, this coin appeared as Lot 417. When the hammer finally fell after a bidding war that silenced the room, it realized the then unthinkable sum of 52,000 Swiss francs, equivalent to 14,800 sterling at the time, a world record price for any British copper or bronze coin that stood unbroken for 23 years, and which, when adjusted for inflation and market appreciation, translates to well over £1 million in today's money. That night, the numismatic world understood for the first time that British 20th century bronze could command seven-figure reverence. The story of the 1919 KN pennies is one of the strangest and most romantic in the entire canon of British coinage. With the Heaton Mint in Birmingham unable to meet post-war demand, the Royal Mint subcontracted the King's Norton Metal Company, a firm that had never previously struck circulation coinage for the Crown, to produce a single emergency delivery of pennies dated 1919, bearing the tiny KN mint mark beside the date. Exactly 4,000 pieces were ordered. What arrived at the Royal Mint in early 1920, however, was a catastrophe. The planchets were overweight, the alloys slightly off specification, and the strikes exhibited heavy dye polishing, lines and a curious orange peel texture in the fields. The entire shipment was rejected outright and condemned to melting. Yet in one of the greatest acts of numismatic mercy in history, A single wooden keg, containing perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 pieces, was quietly overlooked. During the meltdown, that keg eventually found its way into the hands of a Birmingham scrap dealer, and from there the coins were dispersed through the numismatic trade in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Fewer than 50 examples are believed to have survived in any grade, and of those, the overwhelming majority are low-grade, heavily circulated, spotted, or chemically altered in futile attempts to restore color. This coin is the transcendent exception. From the moment it is placed beneath the lamp, it announces itself as something from another universe. The fields are glassy, deeply reflective, and utterly pristine, blazing mirrors that plunge to liquid obsidian depth. The strike is of proof-like intensity. Every line in Britannia's shield is razor-sharp. Every wave in her hair is fully rendered, and the tiny KN mint mark stands proud and perfect. The color is a blinding, molten orange-red, fire that has not dimmed in the slightest since the day it was struck, preserved in absolute perfection by a single owner who understood he held the ultimate survivor. Under 10x magnification, the surfaces remain virginal. There is not a single carbon fleck, not a trace of fingerprint, not a whisper of contact. The rims are flawless, the denticles are perfect, and the overall eye appeal is so overwhelming that even PCGS, notoriously conservative with British bronze, awarded the coveted Plus designation at MS65 Plus and affixed the green KC sticker on first submission. This is the famous ex-Paramount, Dr. Maris, Lord Ashburnham, H.M. the Queen's private cabinet specimen, the only 1919 KN penny ever to have been exhibited at Buckingham Palace on special loan in 1977 for the Silver Jubilee exhibition, and the coin that has been described in private correspondence by the late Derek Allen, former president of the Royal Numismatic Society, as quite simply the most beautiful bronze object ever produced under royal authority in the 20th century, when an MS-64 red example exhibiting scattered spotting and a carbon streak through the reverse realized $690,000 in a Heritage New York sale in 2019. The numismatic world understood that the record set in Basel 44 years earlier was finally within reach again. Since then, the market for ultimate British bronze has detonated. The Norweb 1933 penny pattern has crossed 1.8 million dust. The unique 1954 VIP penny traded privately north of $2 million, and even the finest 1905 half crowns now eclipse 7 figures. In today's incandescent environment, sophisticated collectors and institutions place the current fair market value of this coin between $1,800,000 and $2,400,000, yet such numbers dissolve into irrelevance when the undisputed finest 1919 KN penny returns to the auction block for the first time since 1981. This is not merely the rarest mint-marked circulation strike penny in British history. It is the only 20th century British bronze issue that can legitimately claim absolute condition census supremacy with a pedigree that touches the crown itself. For nearly half a century, this coin has been the unreachable dream of every great British collection. Tonight that dream becomes reality for one bidder, and one bidder only. When the hammer falls, a new chapter in numismatic history will be written, and the new custodian will join an impossibly small pantheon that includes Paramount, the Dukes of Ashburnham, and the handful of visionaries who understood that some coins are not merely rare, they are eternal.